Lanny Horwitz appeared to have it all. He was a man who had built his wealth through smart investments and successful business ventures. After retiring early, he moved to Jupiter, Florida, a quiet, palm-lined community that catered to the well-off and the well-connected. With its coastal charm, warm climate, and reputation for safety, Jupiter seemed like the perfect place to live out the rest of his life in peace. Lanny purchased a large, modern home in a gated neighborhood, surrounded by carefully trimmed hedges, well-kept lawns, and neighbors who minded their own business. From the outside, his life looked stable, even enviable. Living with Lanny was his adult son, Radley. In his early 30s, Radley was soft-spoken, polite, and somewhat withdrawn. Those who knew the family described Radley as someone who kept to himself, often overshadowed by his father's larger-than-life presence. He had once shown promise in school and even had brief aspirations to follow in his father's footsteps in the business world. But somewhere along the way, things unraveled. Radley struggled to hold jobs and was financially dependent on Lanny, which often led to tension between them. Still, they kept up appearances. They were seen working on yard projects together or sharing quiet meals on the back patio. Their neighbors had no reason to think anything was amiss. Adding to the unusual family arrangement was the presence of Donna Horwitz, Lanny's ex-wife. Though they had divorced years earlier after a bitter split, Donna had recently returned to the home under the pretense of needing temporary housing while she sorted out her finances. Most people would find this setup strange, but those who knew the Horwitzes chalked it up to eccentricity. Lanny, despite his pride, often extended help to those who needed it, even if that meant opening his home to an ex-spouse. Donna stayed in the guest room, and although it was clear the old wounds between them hadn't fully healed, they managed to coexist, at least on the surface. Behind closed doors, though, the picture was far more complicated. Donna had never fully moved on from their turbulent past, and tensions in the house simmered quietly. Meanwhile, Radley found himself caught between his divorced parents, trying to avoid conflict while living under the same roof with two people who could barely stand each other. To the outside world, the Horwitz home was just another example of a family with a complicated history trying to make the best of a difficult situation. But inside, years of resentment, disappointment, and silent suffering were festering. Still, there were no obvious signs of what was to come. No loud fights, no calls to the police, no warnings. The Horwitz home remained calm on the outside, its manicured lawn and tidy porch giving no hint of the storm that was building within. No one suspected that beneath the surface of this beautiful life in paradise, something truly sinister was beginning to take shape, something that would soon end in tragedy and leave an entire community in shock. The morning of September 30th, 2011, began like any other in the quiet neighborhood of Admiral's Cove in Jupiter, Florida. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the waterfront homes and still streets. But the calm was broken when a frantic 911 call came from inside the Horwitz residence. Within minutes, law enforcement arrived at the large, neatly kept property, prepared for the worst, though nothing could have prepared them for the gruesome scene waiting behind the bathroom door. Inside the home, officers found Lanny Horwitz slumped over in the first-floor bathroom, lifeless and soaked in blood. He had been shot at close range, once in the back of the head, and again through the temple. The placement of the wounds left little doubt in the minds of investigators. This was an execution, not an accident or a random act of violence. Blood was spattered across the tiled walls, pooling on the floor beneath his body. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass, and no sign that Lanny had fought back. Everything about the scene was chillingly silent and eerily clean outside the immediate area of the shooting. Officers quickly secured the home and began questioning the only two people present, Radley Horwitz and his mother, Donna. Radley stated that he had left early for a morning jog and returned to find his father dead. He claimed to have immediately called for help. Donna, still dressed in a nightgown, appeared dazed and confused. She told police she had been asleep in the guest room all night and hadn't heard any gunshots. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but her answers were vague and occasionally contradictory. Both mother and son denied any involvement in the killing. What struck officers as odd, however, was the lack of forced entry. All the doors and windows were intact and locked from the inside. Nothing had been taken from the home, and valuable items, jewelry, cash, electronics, remained untouched. It was clear this was not a robbery gone wrong. There was no indication that anyone had broken in, and no signs that a stranger had been in the house. Whatever had happened to Lanny Horwitz had come from within. Someone he knew, someone he trusted, had been the one to end his life. Detectives began combing through the scene for evidence. The murder weapon was nowhere to be found. Crime scene technicians collected samples, took photographs, and searched for any trace of DNA, fingerprints, or gunshot residue. Meanwhile, investigators started looking into the Horwitz family background to get a better picture of what might have led to such a violent act. While the neighborhood buzzed with speculation and fear, the Horwitz house was sealed off as a crime scene. Friends, neighbors, and former business associates all asked the same question. Who would want Lanny dead? And why? The answer, it turned out, would lie not in the world outside, but within the walls of his own home, hidden beneath layers of family secrets and long-standing grudges. As detectives began peeling back the layers of Lanny Horwitz's life, what they uncovered was far from the polished image he had presented to the world. While his public persona was that of a successful entrepreneur and respected figure, his private world told a very different story, one filled with fractured relationships, legal disputes, and emotional scars that had never fully healed. The first thread investigators followed was Lanny's history with his ex-wife, Donna. Their relationship had been tumultuous from the start. After years of marriage, raising Radley, and building a shared life, things began to unravel. Financial disagreements, accusations of infidelity, and deep resentment poisoned their relationship. When they finally divorced, it was far from amicable. Court documents revealed multiple legal battles over property, money, and assets. Lanny accused Donna of draining joint accounts and attempting to sabotage his business dealings. Donna, in turn, claimed emotional abuse and financial manipulation. The bitterness didn't fade after the divorce, it simply went quiet. Yet, despite all the hostility, Lanny allowed Donna back into his life and even into his home. Officially, she was there temporarily, in need of support during a tough financial stretch. But behind closed doors, things were far from peaceful. The same resentments that had ended their marriage resurfaced in small, cutting remarks and quiet tensions that hung in the air like fog. Donna didn't have a job, and her nursing license had been suspended years earlier due to disciplinary issues. She had little financial independence and few options, and Lanny made sure she knew it. As detectives reviewed her background, more concerning details emerged. Donna had a history of unstable behavior and had once been arrested for an altercation with a former boyfriend. There were past restraining orders, claims of temper outbursts, and even allegations of emotional instability. What seemed at first like a down-on-her-luck ex-wife started to look more like a potential threat. But while her presence in the home raised eyebrows, nothing tied her directly to the murder, yet. Then, police recovered a disturbing message from Donna's phone. In a text to a friend sent weeks before the murder, she had written, "He won't be a problem for much longer." The statement was vague but dark in tone. Was it a vent of frustration, or something more calculated? Investigators couldn't be sure, but it was enough to raise serious suspicions. Still, Donna wasn't the only one living under Lanny's roof. Radley's name kept coming up as detectives explored the family dynamic. People close to the family described Radley as distant and troubled. He had a complicated relationship with his father, marked by disappointment, pressure, and unmet expectations. While Lanny had been a powerful figure, Radley struggled to find direction in life. He'd bounced between jobs, never able to meet his father's standards. Some said Lanny viewed his son as a burden, a failure he couldn't fix. The deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a family dealing with old emotional wounds. Something darker had been growing behind the facade of civility. Resentments had hardened into grudges. Silence had replaced communication. And somewhere in that quiet tension, a deadly plan had started to form. As suspicion tightened around the Horwitz household, detectives turned their focus to Radley Horwitz. The quiet, reserved son who had once seemed like a background figure in his father's life suddenly became central to the investigation. From the beginning, Radley's version of events on the morning of the murder raised questions. He claimed to have gone for a jog early that morning and returned to find his father dead. But there were no surveillance cameras to verify his route, no witnesses who saw him running, and his timing seemed inconsistent. Detectives began to wonder whether his alibi was carefully constructed or entirely false. A search of Radley's bedroom uncovered several unsettling items. Tucked away in a drawer were boxes of ammunition, and nearby, police found tools commonly used for cleaning firearms. Yet no gun was found anywhere in the house, and Radley denied ever owning one. More disturbing was what investigators found on his computer. Internet searches showed he had looked up topics such as how to remove gunshot residue from hands and how long it stays detectable. These weren't idle curiosities. They pointed to someone planning, or at least researching, how to cover up a shooting. As they interviewed people who knew the Horwitz family, detectives heard the same theme repeated over and over. Radley had always struggled under the weight of his father's expectations. Lanny, described as blunt and domineering, had little patience for Radley's failings. Friends said Radley had once tried to start a small business, but it failed quickly, and Lanny never let him forget it. Their relationship wasn't violent, but it was cold and filled with unspoken tension. Some described Radley as someone who had given up, living in the shadow of a man he could never please. While Radley remained mostly silent during questioning, his demeanor troubled investigators. He showed little emotion when told about his father's death. No tears, no visible anger, no signs of shock. His voice remained calm and detached, even when asked direct questions about the crime scene. It was not the behavior police expected from someone grieving a parent. It was, however, consistent with someone hiding something. Then came the break in the case, though it didn't come from Radley himself. Donna, after hours of questioning and mounting pressure, finally admitted she knew more than she had originally let on. She told investigators that Radley had killed his father during an argument. She claimed Lanny had humiliated him again, and Radley had snapped. According to her, he retrieved a gun from a hidden spot in the house, waited until Lanny was in the bathroom, and shot him. She confessed that afterward, Radley came to her panicked, asking for help. She said she was terrified but chose to protect him, helping him clean up and hide anything that could be used as evidence. Donna's confession changed everything. While she painted herself as a bystander too scared to intervene, her involvement was enough to implicate her in the cover-up. But the weight of her words fell heaviest on Radley, whose silence now spoke volumes. The portrait of a quiet, broken son had shifted to something far darker, a man quietly consumed by resentment, with a secret too deadly to speak aloud. With Donna's confession on record and growing forensic evidence pointing toward Radley, authorities moved quickly to arrest him for the murder of his father. The arrest shocked the community. To many, Radley had always seemed like an introverted, awkward man struggling to find his place, not someone capable of carrying out a calculated, close-range execution. But behind his blank expression and quiet demeanor was a storm that had been building for years, hidden under layers of unspoken anger, humiliation, and failure. Prosecutors built a case rooted in motive, opportunity, and behavior. Radley had both the means and access to commit the crime, and his internet searches revealed he had spent time learning how to avoid detection. He had lived under his father's roof, dependent on him financially and emotionally, while enduring constant criticism and emotional distance. Lanny had reportedly been preparing to cut Radley off entirely, and the threat of losing everything, his home, his financial support, and what little stability he had, may have pushed him to the edge. Donna's testimony became the turning point in the trial. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she agreed to tell the full story. According to her sworn statement, Lanny and Radley had been arguing more frequently in the weeks leading up to the murder. Lanny had grown frustrated with his son's inability to contribute, and Radley had begun isolating himself further. On the night before the shooting, Donna claimed to have heard yelling but didn't intervene. The next morning, Radley retrieved a handgun Lanny kept hidden in the house, waited until he was alone with his father, and pulled the trigger. She told the court she found Radley shortly after the shooting, trembling and in shock. He begged her for help. Caught between fear, guilt, and a mother's instinct to protect her child, Donna agreed to help cover up the crime. She cleaned parts of the scene and disposed of the weapon, though she never disclosed exactly where it was hidden. Her confession, though self-serving, was detailed and consistent with the evidence. Throughout the trial, Radley remained silent. He showed no emotion, never spoke in his own defense, and never explained his actions. Psychologists testified that he suffered from depression and signs of long-term emotional trauma, but the jury saw a man who had chosen silence over remorse. In the end, the verdict was swift. Radley Horwitz was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Donna Horwitz received a lesser sentence for her role, serving several years for being an accessory after the fact. The murder of Lanny Horwitz revealed not just a crime, but a family crumbling from the inside out. Behind the walls of their luxurious Florida home, love had been replaced with control, disappointment, and silence. It wasn't greed or jealousy that drove the crime, it was years of emotional decay. What seemed from the outside like a family repairing itself had, in reality, been collapsing under pressure until one fatal morning brought everything to a violent end.